Welcome to The Blind Side. News and information from a blindness perspective. Here's Jonathan Mosen.
Nice to have you listening for episode 67. Shortly we'll be introducing David Woodbridge, although he's probably someone who to this audience needs no introduction. We spoke with David on Mushroom FM's live global call-in show, A Cuppa at the Mosens, and we took quite a few calls as well. And we're playing an abridged version of that 2-hour show in this week's edition of The Blind Side. It's a fascinating discussion. Really enjoyed talking with David. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell you about Mushroom FM's Top 100 Countdown. This is for the holidays, and it's become a Mushroom FM tradition, where at this time every year, we invite you to vote for your top 10 holiday songs that you feel at the moment. I mean, I can't remember what I voted for in 2016, but I'm pretty confident my votes in 2017 will be a little bit different. Now, we've made voting really easy. You go to mushroomfm.com/countdown2017. That's mushroomfm.com/countdown2017. And you vote number 1 for your most preferred song, just like a regular chart. Number 10 for the song that just makes it into your top 10 list. There's a series of combo boxes, one for each position on the chart, and you're welcome to select a song from that combo boxes. I think there are around 350 tracks in there now. Or you can just write in the song that you would like to vote for in the edit box provided. So either use the combo box or the edit box, fill in that top 10, give us your details, and join us when we count them down. We have this wonderful kind of gathering at the end of the year, every year on Mushroom FM. This year it's on the 17th of December from 9 a.m. US Eastern Time. That's 2 p.m. in the UK, all the way through for 10 hours. And we get together on Twitter. We have a lot of banter, a lot of fun. Everyone is assigned a seat at one of our tables named after the first 4 reindeer in 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. So that's Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, and Vixen. So you'll get a seat at that table. And people who participate and just have a lot of fun, they get what we call Christmas crackers. I know Christmas crackers aren't very common in the States. They're a big part of Christmas here. And whoever gets the most Christmas crackers at the end of the day in terms of the table gets bragging rights for 2017. It really is a lot of fun. So why not give us your vote? mushroomfm.com/countdown2017. Vote for your top 10 Christmas songs. It is going to be a lot of fun. Just a reminder also that we have 2 more episodes of The Blind Side for 2017 left. And then, as is my tradition, as is the tradition for many people in this part of the world, of course, it's Christmas time and it's also summertime. I'll be taking a glorious month-long break. Mosen Consulting will be closing its doors for the month. Obviously, the store will continue to be open and take your orders, but any projects that people want us to undertake, anything like that, we will file those emails until we get back on the 22nd of January. Boy, am I looking forward to that.
It's time to hear from this week's featured guest on The Blind Side.
We're going to talk technology today, and not just technology, but also somebody who's helped many of us make sense of a lot of technology. He's a prolific podcaster. He's also an instructor, helps people out. And I suppose he has been most widely known for his podcasts on Apple, but he does a lot more than that, especially of late. And he's just across the ditch from us. And our guest today is David Woodbridge. Welcome, David.
Howdy, howdy. Thanks for having me.
Tell me a bit about you yourself, Dave, because we've heard you on so many podcasts, but I don't really know much about your story. Have you always been a blind person?
No, I really lost my sight when I was about 8 because I was one of those unfortunate preemie babies back in the late 60s that got stuck in a humidity crib for about 6 to 7 weeks. Of course, when they shoved all the oxygen in to try and keep me alive, all the oxygen also started to destroy the blood vessels in my retina. So when I got home and over the next probably couple of years, they thought I was intellectually impaired because I kept running into things because my sight was deteriorating. And then by the time I was 8, I ended up having to go to a blind school. And here in Australia, in Sydney, it was North Rocks Deaf and Blind Children's Centre. And that's when I started learning Braille. And I think I completely lost my sight when I was 22, because I used to, when I was from that 16 onwards, I used to race 16-foot skiffs on Sydney Harbour.
Wow.
And I remember seeing the sails in the sun and, the water, then the sun and the water and all that sort of stuff. So I think roughly when I was about 22, but between those particular times, I went to a special school, got integrated into a mainstream school, went to Sydney Uni, did a social work degree because people said I didn't have the aptitude for technology. So I did a humanities type course, social work, and then did a 4-year stint for drug and alcohol crisis counselling, and then decided I had enough of that. So I got offered a job at then the old Royal Blind Society of New South Wales in Sydney, and I've basically been there ever since for the last, 27 years, basically playing, training, assessing and recommending technology for low vision blind people and everybody else that wants to interact with me. So it's, it's been quite a fun almost 3 decades of talking nothing about technology, but I'd love to go back to the original person that said, oh no, look, you can't, you don't have an aptitude for technology, and go, look what I've just been doing for the last 3 decades, mate.
Yeah. So going back to when you were 8, when you were diagnosed, as it were, as someone with a vision impairment, was that a relief for you that somebody finally worked out what the issue was, or was that transition, going to a school for the blind, all of that upheaval, was that a bit difficult?
I think it was a relief to me when I was 8, because up until that point, nobody really understood what was wrong with me. I had been going to, have my eyes checked and everything else, and they just kept giving me more and more glasses to wear. But I guess going to boarding school, it was a bit of a shock because it was boarding school. So I was 400 kilometres away from home, and I was there for, about 10 years. So I actually felt quite lonely, and it was, the typical boarding school bullying happening. And, I loved the school, but I absolutely hated the actual boarding part of the school. And the other thing I really, really hated when I was there was this teacher said that, besides learning Braille, we had to learn how to type on an old manual typewriter. I can remember thinking, I don't know why I have to do this, because I can't see what I'm typing out on a piece of paper. What's the point? I'm really learning to do something when I can't read back the results. And, now looking back, I think, wasn't it lucky that I got taught how to touch type? But back in those days, I just, you'd write up your assignment in print so the visiting teacher could read it. But at the end of the day, you had no idea whether it actually worked or if you had any spelling mistakes or anything else. So, yeah, it was a bit of a disaster, really.
Yes. And I suppose that all of us on this program, I think we're very privileged in some ways, because we remember what it was like before this technology came along, and yet we can still appreciate it and embrace it and understand it when it comes along. But I think it gives us a sense of gratitude that might not exist for those who don't remember when this technology wasn't around.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I can remember we had in the library, we had an Encyclopedia Britannica, and I can remember that
about 200 volumes.
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah, a whole wall. So somebody would say, "Okay, we're studying Wales today," and you think, "God, what row on the big bookshelf is W on?"
Yeah.
And now it's the encyclopedias in our smartphones. So just back then, or I can remember at high school and even primary school when I went to mainstream school. The teacher would always say, well, here's your reading, but if you really want to improve yourselves, you can do this other recommended reading. And I could never do it because by that stage, the stuff hadn't been put into alternative format, or I hadn't had somebody read the book to me. And it was just really irritating. And I kept thinking, life shouldn't be this restrictive. Just because I can't see something, I really shouldn't be having such a hard time in being able to actually either communicate effectively, writing things down, or be able to read stuff. And it wasn't until I actually hit university that I could actually start doing a little bit more. But I just remember going through school and think, this is really, really frustrating, guys.
Yes. And technology is a far cry from the drug and alcohol counselling work that you initially did. I know it's a bit of a stereotype, but Australians love their drink. That must have been a very interesting, interesting job.
Well, it was funny looking back on it now. Because we did lots of campaigns. So we did benzodiazepines, some minor tranquilizers. we did marijuana, we did domestic violence and drugs, and we did lots of other things. And I can remember sitting back there then and thinking, looking back now and think, what the hell does a 22-year-old social worker know about domestic violence? Or what does he know about how hard it is to cope with stress? And that's the reason why you may want to take drugs to cope. We kept getting told at university, oh, no, look, you don't have to experience all the experiences to understand emotions and thoughts and that sort of stuff. But I thought, but my God, it certainly helps having some life experience behind you, because you'd be sitting there talking to a lady who's 44 years old, her husband beats her up, he's an alcoholic, she's on drugs, she can't cope with her children, and you're almost thinking, well, it's no frigging wonder why you take drugs and everything else, because I wouldn't be able to cope either. But so I'd almost wish that I hadn't done that straight away. I wish I would have had at least, maybe 4 or 5 years, a little bit of life behind me before I did that. But I can remember about my 3rd or 4th year, I had a couple of people actually die on me. They committed suicide. And I just thought, I really don't know if this is actually the type of stuff that I want to actually deal with on a personal level as well as a professional level. So I then asked somebody, because in some ways back then too, the technology wasn't there well enough to be able to support computer access properly. And somebody said, well, rather than getting into a computer job as such, why don't you go and see if you can, and I can't remember what we called it back then, but an assistive technology job for training blind or low vision people how to use technology. Because part of my job when I worked for the Drug and Alcohol Service was that I had to access a database, and I can still remember ringing up then the Royal Blind Society and say, look, I've got to access this database of referrals and agencies, detox units and rehab units. And the first thing that came out of the guy's mouth was, well, sorry, no, it can't be done. And anytime somebody says that to me, it's like, well, of course it can be done because you just haven't thought about it. And I can remember accessing then an old Apple IIe, running some software back in those days, which was called ProTerm, which was a terminal software. And all I had to do was trick the PDP-11, which was a little mini mainframe, into thinking that my Apple IIe was a printer. And then I could then dump all the actual database out of the mini mainframe onto the Apple IIe, do a little bit of smart editing with a little word processor I had called ProWord, and then I could search for all the rehab and agency stuff. And every time they updated it, I would just do a new printout and have the same file that everybody else had. So I remember bringing back the person and I said, well, maybe next time, rather than saying no to somebody, particularly when they're in the job, why not just add to the fact and say, well, I don't know, but I can look it up for you. And I said, and next time you get a question about accessing mainframes or mini computers, have a think about an Apple IIe, terminal software, and a bit of thinking in the background, and Bob's your uncle and the person can keep their job.
Was that your first piece of technology, the Apple IIe?
It was my first computer. Looking back on it now, it's one of those things where you think, how the hell did I actually even manage to use that software? Because it was so restrictive at the time. I think my first real, I suppose we can call the Perkins Braille Light technology. So,
oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was my official, I used to always refer to it as the knee breaker because you kept running into people in school and banging their knees. Get out of my way. In the 70s, I was lucky enough to have a bit of a play and use for a while the sonic glasses. Which were the ones that you wore them when it emitted a beam, it came back and you could tell you what different services you were looking at and how far things were away from you. And then I think in the early 80s, when I was also doing my social work degree, I went and did 1 year of a computer science degree at Macquarie University. And I can remember using this computer with what was then called the Votrack synthesizer, because I still remember it because it said error 7.
Yes, and the other thing is if you put naughty words into that, it would actually say beep, I think, or say something. It would actually not let you pronounce certain naughty words.
And that was the voice that was on a lot of the, I believe in Atlanta, it was on the air tram, the airport trains. Yeah, very synthetic sounding.
Wow.
Well, it was really funny because I remember when I first got the Apple IIe, it always kept saying unclone error.
Yeah,
unclone. Yes,
was
right.
that was that with the Echo synthesizer?
Yeah, that was the one. Yeah, and I kept asking people, what's this frigging unclone error? They go, it's unknown. I went, oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, you only had 2 speeds with that Echo, and I think it was Control EE got you into the slow one and Control EC got you into the fast one. Did you use a VersaBraille in those days?
I did use a VersaBraille, yep.
Yeah. So we had that piece of kit set up too. We had a VersaBraille connected to an Apple IIe, and it was on, I don't know, a COM port. So you had to type PR#3 and then return, and then IN#3 and then return. And then you would be able to do input and output from the VersaBraille, which was pretty remarkable, and store all your data on the standard C60 cassette. And it would sound like the thing was going to shudder itself to pieces every time it loaded something.
Oh, yeah, I know. When I went through university from 82 to 86, I think I had a whole wall of C60 and C90 cassettes, the 4-track, because back in those days, I think it was APH, the GE 4-track tape recorder, where you could also record at slow speed.
Yeah.
You could almost go for a whole day a whole day recording just one day when you went to uni. So, but I remember when I finished, I just thought, what am I going to do with these, roughly over 1,000 cassette tapes? Because I had them all nicely labeled and everything else. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to go back and listen to my lectures and tutor ever again.
So what did you do with them?
I think I threw them out.
Yeah, fair enough.
Did you ever have professors that didn't want you to record in class because they were writing a book and they were afraid you were going to sell the info?
No, the only thing that happened to me once, we had to go and get a boat license once, because when we were in sailing club, we had a power boat for, doing rescues and that sort of stuff. We got stuck. And I can remember trying to tape it, and then the guy said, I'm not letting you do this because you're going to copyright my stuff. And I thought, all right, Mr. A, don't worry about it. So, but no, but I can remember playing tricks on some of my lecturers. Like I remember one day, you know how they yell out in the lecture theatre, can everybody see the board okay? And I yelled out, no, I can't.
Yeah.
He actually moved the projector and he went, oi, is that you, Woodbridge? And I went, yeah, sorry, I couldn't resist it. You did ask. I answered you. And it's like you give blind people a bad name.
There you go. You see, yeah. So you're to blame for that. Well, so there are a lot of Apple little floppy disks, and they really were floppy in those early days of the 5 1/4 floppy disks. I mean, they were very floppy and bendable, and you could put data on both sides of the disk. But gosh, I'm thinking of all the games that we used to have. There was a version of Lemonade Stand, and there was Ad Libs and Oregon Trail.
That's it. My favorite game was the Emon Adventures.
Don't know if I remember that one.
It's one of those sort of dungeon games that you had to fight monsters, and if you got killed, you had to start from the beginning again. And I can remember when you because back in those days when you loaded a program, you had to switch floppy disks all the time because half the programs couldn't fit on more than one floppy disk. And I can remember it loading it. It was always exciting to hear the thing load in bit by bit with a really noisy floppy drive, and then it would say, welcome to Email Adventures, and it would say, welcome Dungeon Hunter. And it's like, it's because these days you just run it, it comes up straight away. There's no anticipation.
No fanfare.
There's no fanfare. It's like, oh, come on, can we just have a little bit of, wait time to get really excited? But it was really funny because I remember when I got my first Apple IIe, I think I had, was it 128? No, 64K. And then I got one of those memory boards, the RAM boards inside it. Then I went from a 5 1/4 drive to 2 dual 5 1/4 drives. Then I got a 3.5-inch floppy drive. And then when I actually hit the XT, the old IBM XT range, we've got old Arctic Business Vision.
Yes.
I was very excited when I got a 10 megabyte hard drive.
Dude, my first one was a 20 megabyte one, but it sounded like a very similar path there. Very similar. But I think one of the biggest wow moments for me in those days was when Braille Edit, I mean, those guys at Raise.computing, what they were able to do with the limited power of the Apple IIe was stunning. And I remember going from Braille Edits and getting that expansion board you talked about. So I think it went up to a whole 128K of memory, and we had the 2 floppies, and then they came out with this thing called Bex, Braille Edit Express.
Yes.
And then what Bex could do is if you had the expansion board in your Apple IIe, it would load the whole program. And so instead of pushing E for edit and waiting for the floppy disk to do its whirring thing, because you had to have one floppy drive with Bex in it and the other floppy drive to store data on another disk. But when Bex could load into RAM, you'd push E for edit or whatever the command was, and whoosh, it was there. And I'm like, wow, this is absolutely incredible that we can do this.
I have a confession to make. When I got, there was another program that had all these sort of built-in applications. It was called Workstation. And you had like an info database, you had a contacts database, a document one. And I can remember, just for the sake of it, I actually put in the whole Australian postcode into the info database just because I could then look up the postcode whenever I wanted.
Yes. Yeah, it's great. And I think that Bonnie actually still, do you have your Apple IIe? Was it a 2E that you had?
I had a 2C.
2C?
Yeah, with 2C.
Now, what was the difference between the 2E and the 2C?
I think the C was commercial and the E was educational, if I remember correctly. I mean, I may be dead wrong, but I believe that's what the AT person told me, that C was the commercial model and E was educational. And
you've still got it at home, haven't you?
We're not sure where it is.
Because if that thing boots up still, you might have quite an antique. You might be able to pay for this jolly kitchen.
Yeah. I'm not sure where that thing is. I wish I knew, because it would be fun to boot it up. And
well, there is this Apple II emulator. I take it you've played with that.
I love the Apple II emulator.
Yeah.
I spent the whole day, I just told my little boys to go away, leave me alone.
Yes.
I said, Daddy has to go back at 30 years' time, and I have to play with sort of my real computer. And my son said, but you're using your MacBook Pro touch bar thing. And I went, yeah. But this is just as true talking computers back in the day where, computers were computers and blah, blah, blah. And it was real fun. I loved it. Still love it.
Did you have the Cricket speech synthesizer?
No, I didn't. At one stage I was thinking about getting, I think it was called the Slot Blaster.
Mm-hmm.
At one stage, but no, I just played around with the Echo for quite a long time. But when I got the XT machine, that's when I started running a bulletin board, because when I was transitioning from the Apple IIe to the XT machine, I can't remember the name of the terminal program. It wasn't ProTerm. I think it was called
Procon.
Might have been Procon.
Yeah. There was Telex as well, and
am I imagining? Was there one called Transcend at some stage?
No, possibly. There are a whole bunch of those things.
I know, but I can remember the joy of logging into. I mean, over here in Australia, it was called the Apana network. It was just a lot of Unix systems that you could log into, and then you could run Pine for mail and Links for the web and sort of Dungeons and Dragon type stuff and everything else. And I just think, isn't this fantastic? Me being able to use a talking computer to log into some other system.
Yes.
Mainstream, and nobody knows that I'm using speech. It was absolutely fantastic.
Yes. I remember getting my first modem of my own in 1986 and logging on to the local Fido bulletin board, because it was FidoNet in those days. And you could send an email to someone on the other side of the world, but it would take 2 days to get there, and it would involve a whole bunch of dial-up modems sort of passing the packet from one place to another. What bulletin board software did you go for?
I originally was doing... I know the name of my bulletin board was called Home Computing for some odd reason. GT Power.
Oh, that was an Australian creation, wasn't it?
I think it was actually, yeah. It was really good.
I think it was.
It uses the FidoNet, and I used to hate. Originally, I hated it setting it up because you had to make sure that the routing table went to the right nodes that you were routing.
Yes, that's right. I still remember that my FidoNet node was 3:77250.
Oh dear, that's very sad.
Yeah, it is sort of sad. Yeah, but I tried them all because I was always a fiddler with software. So I did run GT for a while. There was a guy who you may know. I think he looked after because GT they had FidoNet, but they also had their own alternative to FidoNet that GT bulletin boards could also use. And there was a guy, I'm pretty sure his name was John Delator or something like that, because it's such an unusual name, I remember it. And he was based in Sydney. And
no, I didn't know him. He was a lovely guy.
Yeah. But he got a bit annoyed with me because I'd used GT for a while, and then it was time for me to move on. So I moved on to, I think, PC board. I ran a PC board, which was an amazing, and RBBS, I think I ran, and Wildcat, and I was changing them all the time.
I love Wildcat.
Yeah.
Wildcat was brilliant. I remember going from GT Power to Wildcat, and because everybody paid me, I thought, no, this is just spectacular, lovely, beautiful software. Because I think at that stage, we're terrible, aren't we? I think at that stage too, I think I was using Master Touch for DOS.
Yes. That was a very good package because it was one of those ones that found a way of circumventing apps that wrote directly to the screen and didn't use BIOS. So it spoke a lot more than a lot of other screen readers for DOS did.
It did. And I remember at that stage I was using, was it PC Anywhere?
Yeah.
Remote machines using Master Touch. And I also had the Master Touch, what was it called? The tablet, the external.
Yes, that was pretty innovative for its time, wasn't it? Touch tablet, yeah.
Running your finger across the line and finding out where the cursor was and viewing text. I thought, oh, wow, this is computing at its best, to being able to do that so quickly.
When you think about it, it was sort of 30 years ahead of its time.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was. I mean, I almost wouldn't mind if my iPad or my iPhone could even do that now with, VoiceOver on the Mac or another screen reader on Windows. I mean, that'd be pretty spectacular, really.
Let's go to talk to Chris now. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how's it going?
Super well, mate. Super well. Especially for a blind guy.
Oh, it's funny. You guys are all talking about technology that's like older than I am. It's been really interesting listening to all this stuff.
Yeah, well, we are very ancient now. Yeah. I mean, we are just so ancient.
The only thing that I used that was really, well, I had probably one of the first Braille Lights that was, I think it was back in 93 or 94.
How about you, David? Did you use a Braille Light?
I had Braille and Speak, a Braille and Speak 640, a Braille Light, and a Type and Speak.
Yeah.
You had a Type and Speak and a Braille and Speak, and then the Type and Speak, and then the Braille and Speak 2000.
It's funny, the Braille and Speaks didn't really make a huge impact down here because we had alternatives like the Pulse Data products, and there was the Eureka as well, which came out of Australia from a company called Robotron.
Yeah, that was. I can remember that. I could never work out though. Why would the Eureka have a voltmeter in it?
Yeah, it had some interest. A voltmeter, music composer, all sorts of interesting. It had a very interesting synthesizer. I believe it was the first female speech synthesizer I ever heard.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most disgusting synthesizers I've ever heard. Actually,
it was certainly an acquired taste.
But no, I mean, in actual fact, if I still had my Braille and Speak today, or my Braille Light, I'd probably even still use it as a good note taker, because that's what I liked about it. You could just switch it on, just jot a few notes down, turn it off, and off you go. So, no, I mean, looking back at technology, both the Braille Light and the Braille and Speak were sort of my favorite types of note takers, I think.
They were the most robust, I think, ever made.
Well, everything was in RAM, you see, so it was very quick, and it just did what it did well. Yeah.
And they were the first ones, I think, to really, I mean, that I know of anyway. I'm sure there were ones before, but I think they were the first ones that really took off.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, as far as Braille devices go, I mean, there was also back then the old classic, it was called the T1000.
And I actually went down to Blazy Engineering because we didn't live that far from Maryland. We were in Pennsylvania, and we were only a couple hours away. And we actually went down there a couple of times, a couple of blind kids from our area, and they were the nicest. Before they got bought out and merged and all that kind of stuff. So they were some of the nicest people. I don't remember who I met. I think it was Tom, and I think I might have met. Can't remember if I ever met any of the actual Blazy people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the other thing I had from Blazy too was their Blazy embosser, the 32.
The Blazer, yeah.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I mean, just a nice little portable embosser that you could take anywhere you liked in the old single and parallel port days.
We had a VersaPoint at school, and I thought it was really interesting that it would braille out all its settings and things. I don't even think it had a speech synthesizer in it. That thing was loud, though. Holy cow. We could only braille at certain times of the day because we were right next to a classroom, and they told us we couldn't.
That's interesting. You talking about loud devices reminds me. Another thing we had alongside the VersaBraille and the Apple IIe, we also had a Cramner modified Perkins. I'm not sure if anyone here remembers. Oh, you remember those?
I had one of those.
Yeah.
When my first job, I had one. That thing was loud. Looked like a player piano.
It was very loud, and it had a totally different kind of feel to it when you brailled because they weren't. Yeah, the keys didn't go all the way down like a Perkins, but you could also use it as an embosser, so you could connect it and print out documents using Braille Edit. Yeah.
That's interesting. I never heard. The only thing I ever saw modified Brailler was really a Braille and print. That wasn't really a modified.
Now, that was an Australian thing. Wasn't that Quantum who did that, David?
quantum. In actual fact, I had to do my stats for how many clients I saw and that sort of stuff during the week when I was working at the hospital for drug and alcohol. And that's how I did my stats for the week. I got my Perkins out, whacked it on the Braille print because it had little metal springs underneath it that connected with the key rods under each of the keys. And as you brailled out, and you hit the enter key, it actually brailled out that line of text out to the printer. That was really amazing technology at the time, the late 80s. It was great.
Yes, it was.
Do you remember the Mountbatten Brailler?
Yeah, it's actually still around, believe it or not.
Is it?
Oh, wow.
Yes, it is still around. Yeah. I mean, they're still quite expensive. I mean, the new one can actually do music composition now.
Mm-mm.
It's called the Mountbatten LS as a learning system. And it's got built-in speech. And what's really cool about that one now is that you can use an app called MB Mimic on your iPhone or Android device, and you can actually emboss to the Mountbatten from your iPhone or Android device.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that makes it very beautiful. So it's the other thing I just like about the Mountbatten, or I still like about the Mountbatten, is a sighted person or a sighted parent, someone, you can plug in a standard QWERTY keyboard, start typing, and you've got a Braille copy of the document as it comes out on the Mountbatten. And if you plug in a little screen called the Mimic, you can also see what you're brailing in on the Mountbatten. So it's a really versatile device. I still like it.
Hi, Michael.
Hey there, Jonathan. Yeah, what a show. It actually seems very interesting. It's interesting actually hearing you guys talk about the old technology, and I have never heard, I'll just be really honest with you, I have never heard some of that technology you guys are talking about at all. Never even heard of it.
No, well, I'm not surprised. We're considerably older than you are.
Well, all right. Then, but if you're not surprised, then that's fine.
Yeah, I kind of wish I'd been born 20 years later. It'd been nice.
Do you? I don't. I think it was a really great pioneering time to grow up with all that technology just coming through.
And I think on some levels, it taught us to be more self-sufficient, maybe.
I guess it did. I mean, just the way you guys are describing some of that technology is just awesome. I really like the idea of it.
It's retro, man. It's retro. It'll come back in again.
Probably.
You wait. So, just like vinyls come back, and apparently there's a bit of a resurgence of cassette tapes. You wait, and the next year, 5 1/4-inch floppies will be the in thing.
I have a drawer of very nice 3.5-inch floppy disks that I use for coffee cup placement holder things. Because I get them out, put them on the table, and people go, "What's that?" And it's like, it's a floppy disk. And they go, "It's not floppy, it's rigid." And it's like, no, inside the plastic, there's a floppy magnetic disk. And they go, "What's that for?" And it's like, we used to put them in the computers. When punch cards were around or something in 1970 or something.
Did you show them? Did you show them the floppy disk?
I did. I've actually got one I've actually pulled it apart. So I said, "This is a little floppy disk," and yes, that's actually a smaller version. We had a 5 1/4-inch one, so it just makes a good talking point because I just got so sick and tired of it. I kept losing my coffee things for the table. So yeah, this is a nice little talking point. People go, "Oh, you're a bit weird, aren't you?"
What? See, so what you're saying? You just put the coffee thing on top of the floppy disk, or
yeah, absolutely,
like a coaster.
I'm never going to use. Yeah, that's it. A coaster. That's the word I was looking for. But yeah, because I just thought I'm never going to use them again, and they were just sitting around the house doing nothing. Although I must admit, I've still got a prime set of 4 3.5-inch discs that Jaws originally came on.
Oh yeah, the diskettes. Yeah,
that's not getting used as coffee coasters. That's safely in its own little plastic package that I put it back in, and that's because I originally started using Jaws for Windows 1.0 from the word go. And that's
what was Jaws like in those days? Just out of curiosity, I mean, what was it like? Because I mean, I hear a lot about it, it being really good from 3.0 and stuff. But what was it like? It
actually blew the socks off other Screenreaders at the time.
Yes, it did.
We had WinVision, Window Bridge. We had a blasted one called ProVision.
Pro Talk, I think.
That's it, Pro Talk, which changed the interface.
Yeah, both Pro Talk and Window Bridge were from Canada, and I think Window Bridge might have been first. There's a blind guy called David Woodbridge who developed that, and I don't know about you, David, but I remember spending far too much money dialing into bulletin boards. In my case, it was Willie Wilson's Blink Link bulletin board in Pennsylvania, and I would download the latest copy of Window Bridge or whatever it was. But I remember being really concerned, and you may well have been as well, that we were starting to make some real gains. Computers were starting to do genuinely useful things. By that stage, we had things like WordPerfect, and we were doing quite seriously grunty word processing. You could write a book with WordPerfect if you knew what you were doing. And then all of a sudden,
that's crazy.
Yeah, Windows started to come along, and it felt like things were slipping away. And even when I used tools like Window Bridge, innovative as it was, it still made me concerned that we were never going to have the ease of use. And when I remember, I'll never forget the first day I used JAWS for Windows. I think it was at a blindness convention I went to on a scholarship. And when I got my hands on JAWS, I just thought, thank God, everything's going to be okay.
Right.
You know, it was just such a massive difference.
And the commands have pretty much stayed standard over the years, if I remember correctly, from 3.0.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I like looking back on stuff, and people forget this sort of stuff from an overall point of view, the time when Windows 3.0 to 3.1 came out and the time we had a screen reader for it was roughly about 15 to 18 months. But ever since that time, the amount of time it takes technology companies to actually produce a version for the new version of Windows is almost now down to zero.
Wow.
Right around. So when we went to XP, what was it, 95, XP, Vista.
It was 95 XP, Vista, then 7, then...
Yeah,
Well, you forgot Millennium. You've got 98 as well.
Sorry, 98. Yeah, whoops.
Yeah.
Whoops, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it took a while for us to get access to Windows 95. And that's the kind of catch up, because in those days, really, screen reader developers were hacking into unorthodox ways of getting at what was on the screen. There was no officially supported way of doing it. It wasn't until Microsoft Active Accessibility came along, really, that Microsoft sort of formally acknowledged the existence of screen readers. I mean, they knew they were around, but there wasn't any sort of formal support within the operating system for them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We had JAWS with the software synthesizer. Or was it back in 3.2 when it came on CD, I think?
Yeah, it's been about then,
So that was the time I think, wow, software synthesizers, mind you, as an Apple person, I went, well, we've had software synthesized sound chip in the Mac since 1990, guys, but very primitive, of course. We still had it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all the external synthesizers that you had to use. One thing that I know doesn't exist today, and I wish it still did. Remember the Arctic Transport when it had the screen reader built into it? You could actually do a comms thing from back to your serial port. You could actually download the screen reader off your external synthesizer onto a computer. Do
you know the other thing that they had that hasn't been replicated, I don't think, was a little thing called the Speaqualizer. I don't know if you remember the Speaqualizer, David, but the unique thing about that was somehow they had a way of letting you access your DOS machine's BIOS. So getting into the BIOS was always a tricky thing. David, your involvement in Apple, you, I guess, retain some sort of loyalty to Apple, right? In the sense that a lot of us kind of just drifted away from Apple for a long time, really until the iPhone. Maybe some people came back when VoiceOver came to the Mac, because the Apple just became inaccessible to most people, I think.
Yes, those were the dark ages. Yes, I can remember when we because back in the early 90s we had Outspoken for the Mac that worked from System 7, 6.07 and up to, I think, version 8. And then when 9 hit, and then when 10 originally hit, when they changed it over to, the Mac operating system rather than the system versions, between 8 and 10, the only way you could use a Mac was large print, so close view or other built-in screen magnification, which there was only one other one. So it wasn't until 10.4 Tiger on the Mac, which was in 2004, that we had speech. And that was a bit grim because, I mean, I really enjoyed my SE and all that sort of stuff. So there was about I can't remember now, about maybe a 5 or 7 year gap where I couldn't use a Mac anymore. And the only reason I got back into a Mac in the beginning was in about 2004, a client rang up the then Royal Blind Society. We hadn't quite transitioned to Vision Australia, and he wanted training on the Mac. And I thought, my God, I haven't actually played with the Mac now for God knows how long. I think I spent 100 hours training myself on how to use the Mac again from a VoiceOver point of view. And from that time on, I just started using the Mac more and more because back in those early days of, mid 2000s, the only thing about Windows to me is that while you've got really good screen readers now, particularly JAWS, on top of the hill, you do have situations sometimes where you lose speech. And if you're not very careful, you do need to get sighted assistants to get it back. Or you have your charming partner who can't stand the sound talking. So rather than unloading the screen reader, they actually mute it. So it's very hard to work out what the hell's going on. So I'd say ever since 2005 and particularly 2009, that's when I really started, going whole over to the Apple. And I've had, here at home at the moment, I'm sitting on a table with 5 Macs on it. In our other study, we've got 3 Macs in there, and the whole house is just riddled with iPhones and iPads.
How do you feel about the progression of Apple? Because I detect that you might not be as happy as you once were. I decided to bow out. The touch bar was the last straw for me because I enjoyed having the ability to run Windows and Mac OS on the same device. And once you start getting into the touch bar, that's quite difficult. You've also, I think, expressed a little bit of skepticism about the iPhone 10. Are you concerned about Apple's trajectory?
Yeah, look, I think I am. I mean, the part of the problem is, and it's like everything, I have put so much money into the Apple environment.
Yeah.
That it would be horrendously expensive. I mean, I've got around about at the moment, I think just on roughly about 3,000 apps off the App Store. I've got about 1,000 iBooks, all the Macs we've got, all the iPhones and everything else. So from that point of view, I'm heavily invested. But I think when things started going downhill for me a little bit was we lost the headphone jack. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I can sort of cope with the Bluetooth headset after that bit. Then Apple then got rid of the function keys. And I can still remember Phil Schiller's silly statement, nobody uses function keys anymore than people used to use on the old 3270 mainframes. And I thought, spoken like a mouse user, mate.
Yeah,
So that irritated me. And then, they got rid of
But wasn't he also the one who said that they were brave for taking the headphone jack away? I mean, what sort of nonsense is this?
No, that was just absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely stupid spin.
Yeah, and the fact is, I picked up my wife's. We just got the iPhone 10 this morning here. It's it's Ellen's one, my wife's. And the first thing I thought, this feels like an Android phone. This does not feel like an iPhone anymore. I know you were talking about this in your Blindside podcast too, is the fact that you've got so many of these angled gestures, and I was starting to think, what's it like training somebody on the gestures for control center notifications or the app switch or your home function, where you've got to say to somebody, drag your finger up the screen, wait, activate that particular function, say for the home function, or you go up further up and that'll bring up your app switch. Now, I know some people that have even trouble with some of the really basic gestures of VoiceOver on the iPhone, and I just start thinking that's going to be an issue. And then we've got the fragmentation starting to happen. So if you've got an iPhone 10, you use VoiceOver or the iPhone in a certain way. If you've got an iPhone 8, you would use it in a different way. And God help, if you've got an iPad, you use it differently as well. So
I am laughing with some frustration because I'm at the moment producing a very, very long set of modules for people who've never used an iPhone before. And oh my goodness, it's so complicated now because you have to say, look, if you have an iPhone with a home button, you do it this way. And if you have an iPhone without one, you've got to do it this way. If you have an iPhone actually before Touch ID, you might have to do it a different way again. So it is starting to get very complex, but you're right. I mean, that's why I was so excited about finding the Samsung and how well developed their screen reader was, because I'm just not willing to give TalkBack another look until they get with multi-touch. I find the angular gestures, from my personal point of view, I can't get them reliably correct. I can get them right some of the time, but I don't understand what I've done that sometimes that I'm not doing the other times when I can't get it to work. And so I find it difficult to train people with it. And yet the voice assistant really makes Android look at least a lot more viable.
Oh, it's lovely. I mean, I've got a Samsung tablet sitting on top of my $3,500 he says quickly coffee machine, because that app is fully accessible driving the coffee machine, and I just love using Voice Assistant. I mean, it really is a nice screen because you can literally, flick through the controls and go straight to the notification center, whatever you want to do with it. So, it is really good. The other thing I find hard with Apple at the moment is their keyboards are awful. The new, whatever it is, the butterfly mechanism keyboards on the new MacBook Pro Touch Bar and the new Magic keyboards and so on. When I'm doing serious typing, I always go back to either my MacBook Air from 2013 or my MacBook Pro from 2013 because it's just a much nicer keyboard to type on.
I don't know what they were thinking because that older Apple Mac keyboard was one of the most beautiful things I've ever typed on.
It is.
When I left the Mac world and I got my new laptop with it's about a year old now, with the built-in LTE, which is something I use all the time, just being able to switch on built-in LTE. I thought, why isn't Apple doing this stuff? They've got some really cool stuff going on with iPad in the way that they have this virtual SIM where you can get a plan with a local carrier really easily, and that's wonderful. And for professionals, which is what the MacBook Pro is supposed to be about, I would have thought building an LTE to the MacBook Pro would be far more useful than a touch bar.
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, I've got a MacBook. Sorry, not a Mac Pro. I've got an iPad Pro here on my desk, and the smart keyboard's good, but I certainly wouldn't use it for serious typing. But I like the side-by-side app switcher on the iPad Pro. It's really great when you've got one window open for your Twitter feed, you've got another window open for Safari. Particularly when I'm doing my radio program once a week on technology, I have to trawl through God knows how many thousand bits of stuff on the internet just to get 16 stories per week to talk about. So, the iPad Pro does come in really handy, but I'm almost getting to the stage now where I'm not panicking, but it's like I just so do not want to go back to Windows, or I don't want to go back to Android because I don't want to. I mean, I've really enjoyed using Apple, but I just think, guys, you start to do some things that I don't agree with.
There's an opportunity there for these Android devices. I mean, when you look at what the Samsung is doing, the S8 does have some quite cool innovations, like the ability to set certain locations, like your home, where you can unlock without fuss because it knows your home, which is really neat. And it has very primitive facial recognition compared to what iPhone X has, but it has a Touch ID as well. I mean, I would have preferred Touch ID on the back of the iPhone X rather than lose Touch ID altogether.
No, that's right. I mean, on my Nexus, I've got a Nexus Android phone. On the back of that's got Touch ID, and I think that seems to be the perfect spot for a fingerprint sensor because you hold the phone and your finger naturally falls on the Touch ID. What we're doing at Vision Australia too now, we're recommending people get the, I think it's the Samsung J3 series of phones because that still actually has the home button on it. And a few of the Android style phones still have home buttons on it. So, because one thing I've always liked about I've got a Samsung Note Tab. What's nice about that is with Android, I can assign the home button, physical home button to answer a call and the power button to hang up a call. So it's almost like a real old Nokia phone back in the old days where you could physically press a button to answer and press a button to hang up again. It's really, really cool.
Yes. Gosh, Samsung even does the old speed dial thing. You remember those from the Symbian days where you can actually hold down, say, the number 2 and call a number? Samsung actually does that in the in the S8. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Actually, it was funny. My first, speaking about Nokia, I can remember I was very proud when I got my first Nokia, which was that communicator one with the keyboard, the 9210.
Yes.
And I had
gosh.
The weird thing was the Symbian part of it talked, but you couldn't use the phone part of it. So it was quite bizarre. And I can remember, I mean, I went through all the N series ones and the E series ones, but I mean, I know now with TalkBack being gone and everything else, I mean, here in Australia, I don't know if you've probably got it in there, the Capsys Smart Vision 2, which is the new, well, not the new one, but that's the Android phone with a touchscreen and a real keyboard. Yeah.
Do you think that opens up the smartphone world for people who might be a bit reluctant to use a touchscreen?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've got quite a lot of people that I've spoken to on the help desk at Vision Australia about the fact that, they want to be able to do things like send messages, and they want GPS, and they want an address book, and they want all this sort of stuff, but they don't want the touch screen because for one reason or another they find it really hard. And when you say you can up and down arrow and you've got real keys to press, and you've also got a button you can push in if you want to use the OK Google bit. So guys, I've just set up everybody's Google Homes. That's really exciting. So I probably had lots, I guess maybe this year, maybe 20 to 25 inquiries about, because people say to me, I want a real phone. You go, what do you mean by a real phone? Oh, I want one of these crappy smart things. I can't use those. I want a phone with real buttons. I want to make phone calls.
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously, all of us here don't have too much difficulty using these things. We're all iPhone users, and you and I, David, have got Android devices too. But I think we're in a privileged position in that we get to see just how much of a struggle it is for some people. And I do get a bit sad when I see, particularly on social media, people who are quite contemptuous of other blind people's difficulties with using this technology. And I do get quite concerned about the digital divide, both in terms of the cost of this stuff, but also just that some people do really struggle with it. And it's not that they're thick, it's just that some people have a better aptitude for technology than others.
No, and it's really funny because I can still remember when I did my first series on the iPhone. This is from the iPhone 3GS days. I can remember I did not do a podcast on the phone function until about the 25th podcast because I suddenly realized, I thought, oh, hang on a minute, this is a telephone. I don't just have to play with apps and everything else. I can really talk to people. So that was quite bizarre. So I'll probably do a really, really quick podcast on the iPhone 10 just to keep my website up to date with what's coming out new and so on. But I thought one of the first things I'm going to do with that one is just do a phone call, because everybody says to me in the help desk, most things that people have trouble with is either making or receiving calls, or, God help us, two-finger double tap to hang up or answer a call on the iPhone. That seems to be an issue all the time with the iPhone.
Yes, well, that's interesting, that, isn't it? Yeah. I must admit, David, I do think the iPhone 10 is really sexy. I like my iPhone 10, and I'm still at the point where I just love holding it out in front of me and seeing it unlock because it sees my pretty face, and I'm like, oh, dude, this is just too magical. And hi, Pam, I do believe we have you this time, finally.
First of all, this walk down memory lane, David mentioned Transcend. That was, I believe the company was still Bill Grimm software. He had a little modem software program called, which was a modification, had a talking Transcend, I think it was.
That's right. Yeah.
And I used that for a while. And but my first was the Echo 2 before the iPhone, before the Apple. I had the old Apple II before I got the PC clone rather. And that was very interesting. And I remember I had friends who were very devoutly Christian, and they would not say any of these words. But boy, they would type a string of words that would turn my hair blue and let the machine say it. I didn't say it, it did.
Yeah, we would, in computer class, I remember we had a student that typed a whole bunch of curse words in because they didn't realize that it was popping up on the screen in print. So the teacher saw it.
Excuse me.
I still remember I split up with my little teenage girlfriend, and I wrote my first ever computer program in BASIC on the Apple IIe, and it was 10, print, quote, "This is a bad day," quote, and then 20, go to 10. So then I let the program run, and of course, "This is a bad day" just kept scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and the teachers in the resource room had to pull me out of the class to ask me how to exit this program that had "This is a bad day" scrolling.
And of course, there were those words like psoriasis with the PC clone. A few words you just wrote them because you knew that the word was going to be woefully mispronounced. Oh, those days were fun. Yeah, it was the Apple II Plus. Those were the days. And a few weeks ago, I was talking with some friends about the old Blink Talk and Blink, the old bulletin board days and the old Fidos. And I remember when I got my first Braille display was the Alva 286. And my boyfriend at the time and I would be sitting up trying to download something before 5 a.m. Eastern. And all of a sudden we'd get down to, and I was in New York at the time, and I'd have my hand on this cursor and it would be like 440, 490, 458, and the percentages would be lost and then regained. And I was sitting there, go, 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 go.
Why was 5 a.m. important? Was that when it got more expensive to...
No, that's when the whole thing shut down and everybody started calling each other.
Yeah, for the maintenance mode, yeah. Let's say hi to... here's somebody who's got a whole lot of reminiscences for us, I'm sure. David Goldfield, welcome.
I actually agree with you, Jonathan, in that I think it's great that we were around at the time that we were around in the 80s and 90s, because it really gives you a good appreciation of where we came from. And I think that one of the things that's happening now, and I'm sure all of you have talked about this and would agree with it, that I never thought I would see back in the day, is this convergence with mainstream and assistive technology between what Apple's doing and now what we have with Android and also with the Amazon products, that now mainstream products are assistive technology products. That's just really remarkable to me.
I think that's right. I think it is great, but I also think that these companies who are choosing to be assistive technology companies have to be held to account in the same way that we would hold any other assistive technology company to account. They should be able to support their products properly and release them without really major show-stopping bugs.
Oh, that's absolutely correct. And I've read your blog posts about some of your concerns over the years that you've had with Apple, and I think you're absolutely correct. And we should hold them accountable just as we would, have issues with a screen reader. If they began to break accessibility, that would not be tolerated. And so I think that's absolutely true. I was wondering what you guys thought specifically of the speech output in many of the Amazon products, particularly the Fire tablets, and if you think that they're going to become more and more popular in the blindness community, not necessarily because they're the best out there, but because they're not bad and they're also extremely affordable.
I actually agree. I mean, I think the Fire tablets are excellent. I've got an older one, so my Fire tablet is about, I think it's about 2 years old now. But one of the things that drove me nuts, and this might be more talkback rather than the built-in speech, but just all the bongs and twangs and everything else it does when it changes focus on the screen, I had to end up turning off the sound effects because it used to just drive me crazy. It almost felt like it was a harder interface to drive because it was so noisy. And that's when I turned it off, it was fine. But no, I mean, the cost price of it, the fact that you've got access to all your Android apps if you want to, you've got Audible, Kindle. Here at Vision Australia, you've got access to our library with the Android version of our library. So, to get somebody into the tablet market that doesn't want to spend horrendous amounts of money, I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, I think, David, you will find if you play with the newer models, with the newer versions of VoiceView, that the ear cons are much more tolerable. In fact, it's very similar now to what you hear with the newer versions of TalkBack, where they kind of calmed down those ear cons. And Amazon actually did that first, I think, or maybe around the same time. My wife has a Fire tablet. She has full vision, but when I've used it to set it up for her, the ear cons were much more tolerable. And now that she's bought an HD 10, I am now inheriting her older HD 8. So I'll be really immersing myself into the whole Fire OS VoiceView, operating system.
What's also good about VoiceView is that they too have gone substantially multi-touch. VoiceView gestures are quite similar in some respects to iOS and Windows. It's not that I expect all gesture sets to be exactly the same, but it does seem crazy to me that if you allow a screen reader to customize itself, with the gesture set, why not allow those devices that do have multi-touch capability to avail themselves of those greater variety of gestures for the screen reader?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I also wanted to make a really quick comment. You guys were talking about a half an hour ago about the early days of Windows screen readers. And I don't know if any of you will remember this, and it was not an extremely popular product, and it wasn't out for very long. But Lazy Engineering, where I worked for in the 90s, actually did produce their own Windows screen reader. And while it was not the first out there, it was definitely one of the earlier ones. It might have been, I don't know, maybe the third. And it was called Windows Master. And it was only for Windows 3.1. Never went past that. And once we started carrying JAWS, I think Dean kind of realized, JAWS is even in its early stage. And I also was a JAWS 1.0 user. I remember the very first version that shipped. And I think they kind of realized, hey, JAWS really has it together and we'll just carry JAWS, and Windows Master went away. But it was really funny because I remember working with someone who was writing the documentation for Windows Master. And, nowadays you can go on mailing lists or discussion groups and just, call the nearest blind guy that to ask, hey, how do I do this or that in Windows? Back in 1992, that just generally wasn't the case. You could get lots of DOS help, but there weren't a lot of blind people that were really savvy with Windows, at least that I could easily find. And so we were, struggling with writing the documentation for this and trying to learn all of the Windows paradigms at the same time. It was really quite a time.
Actually, it was interesting. Speaking of screen reader, which almost my first introduction to Windows 3.1. Remember the IBM screen reader for OS 2?
Yes. I remember it conceptually. I never used it, but I do know of it.
It was fantastic because I thought at the time, wow, having this keypad that's got multi-layers, so you could do, so down the left-hand side it had A to D, and it had a numeric keypad. So you could do these layered screen readers commands with, A1, B1, and so on. And the fact that it worked beautifully, you could switch between OS 2 and Windows. I just thought, wow, I can use two operating systems at once. Isn't this absolutely brilliant? Mind you, at the time, I didn't hardly use either one of them, really. But it was just a really good conceptual idea because at the time, too, I think we were having a lot of trouble with screen reader magnification with, Magic and Zoom Text and all the other ones falling over. And I think Telecentury produced one called, the one that was Vista. But it had an external.
I think you might be right.
I remember
Vista. It had its own graphic card and its own mouse, which meant it left the operating system pretty well much alone, and all its magnification was done on its own video board. It was absolutely amazing.
I'm going to hold the calls at this point because I did want to talk to you before we go, David, about your gadgets, the things that have really impressed you in 2017. And I know that you've been into smart speakers. Is that figuring big on your list of gadgets in 2017? It is.
In fact, it's at the top of my list, actually.
Yep. Which one? Google Home or Echo or both?
Both. I think there was a software update done recently for the Google Home and the Mini where you can control the bass, because one of the things that used to irritate me about the Google Home was it was too bassy when you were listening to spoken word, like on a podcast or a newsreader talking. So you can adjust the bass frequency now. Well, it seems that you can, which is why I like the Google Home Mini, because it's not so bassy. And both of them. I mean, I tend to use, like I said, the Google Home and the Minis for broadcasting and casting to all my audio devices and everything else around the house. The Echo really gets used for all its different types of skills that I've currently got activated, including checking my Outlook calendar and so on, and the Audible and Kindle books. Because it was actually funny. I was talking to a person a while ago, and I said, perhaps you sort of got to make your mind up if you want to go down the Echo route or the Google Home route. And somebody said to me, "Who says you can't have multiple smart speakers?" I mean, there's no harm in getting whatever you like as long as you can use them and they work with the stuff that you've already got.
Well, one of the things about Sonos is that from the one app, you can access a multiplicity of services. So you can access Apple Music, Spotify, Pandora, on and on and on, TuneIn, all these services from the one app, which is beautifully accessible, and they maintain it that way. And Sonos has come out with a speaker called the Sonos One. It has Alexa support now, but they're also going to include Google Home support. So in that one speaker, you'll have access to both ecosystems. But, I want to press you on this because I'm supposed to be the probing interviewer. But if push came to shove
Yes.
And you had to choose between Google Home and Amazon Echo. If someone said you've got to pick one, which one would you pick?
The Echo.
Really?
Why is that?
Why is that?
It's because at the moment, particularly here in Australia, there's a lot more functionality that Echo has over the Google Home. I must say one thing that I do use a little bit on the Google Home, which the Echo does not do here in Australia, and it might change next year when it's local, is I can say to Google Home, what's my next bus or train from my current location? And it gives me the current time and how long it's going to take to get to Gosford or Sydney, for example. So that might change when we've, got official localization of the Echo in Australia. But, if I had to choose, I think I'd still go for the Echo overall.
It's a great gadget, isn't it? And it's got personality. It's just a really cool gadget. We love the Echo ecosystem.
But interestingly, you saying that, I heard somebody on a tech show yesterday saying a side person in the US saying they'd go for Google Home. And that's in the US. Yeah.
Look, the only reason I'm going to get a HomePod next year is because that's part of my job. As to keep up with the latest and greatest in technology, and I can always claim it back on tax, which is good.
Yes, we're in the same position here, of course.
Because people go, how can you claim that on tax? And it's like, look at my job description.
Yeah, it's a business. It's a business expense, and that's the only reason why I'm getting the the new iPhone every year and that sort of stuff. But so, tell me about other gadgets that have caught your attention.
Well. Yeah, you're going to be shocked by this one because I'm such an Apple person. You're going to probably be shocked for me to say that I was very impressed by the Braille.
Yeah, no, I'm not shocked because I'm impressed by it too. I mean, it's a great machine.
It is, and look, the fact that you're using standard Windows 10. I mean, you've got the 14 or 40 cell focus Braille display. The fact that you can use it with your iOS or Android device. I mean, it really is, a nice device because, I know the Braille Note Touch has got Android in it, but so often with these custom blindness note takers, you're using its own interface. And if you need sighted assistance, which a lot of people do, then being able to just plug a screen in and use a standard operating system like Windows 10, it makes from a support point of view, particularly in remote areas, so much easier.
A couple of things that really just keep me coming back to Braille. One is the built-in LTE, which is just, on a device that size to be able to sit in the back of a cab or a bus or something and have internet access with the built-in LTE is fantastic. The other thing is the remote desktop support. For example, I have to maintain Mushroom FM. Every so often, some process or system or whatever on Mushroom FM needs to be reset, and I'm able to log in just with a little Braille on my lap, log in remotely to the Mushroom FM PC, run JAWS in remote desktop mode, and get stuff done. I mean, that is incredibly powerful.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that's, to me, that's one of the outstanding ones. The other one that's outstanding for me now is the proliferation of, the Sony Bravia TVs, the Samsung 9000 TVs, all these new TVs coming out with Android TV or variations of it that have got built-in accessibility. So, as we were saying earlier on, where assistive technology is meeting mainstream or vice versa, the fact that you've now got an accessible television that you can use really opens up a lot for you, because I know, I've got PlayStations and Xboxes and Apple TVs and DVD burners and everything else linked up to my TV. And the fact that I can change my source independently it just sounds so basic that, the fact is amazing, rather than having to wait for somebody to go, just press one button. You think, was it that easy? Couldn't you just pretend for a little minute that it was hard?
Oh, the things we used to memorize, David, the little sequences that we used to have to memorize, and I guess we're just not tolerant of that anymore because we expect better, But we did used to have to memorize all sorts of crazy sequences to do things. The nice thing is too, of course, when you've got that accessible TV and you switch to your Xbox, it's even accessible.
It is, and I've gone away from the Apple TV a little bit towards the Xbox now. My boys love the Xbox, and as a parent blind, I can verify what they're doing on the Xbox and monitor their non-multiplayer game access and a few other little things. But it's the fact that I can walk up to a standard machine. It was really funny because somebody rang me up one day and helped them. They said, "I want the accessible version of the Xbox," and I said, "Well, there isn't one." And they went, "Well, what do you mean there's not?" And I said, it's built in.
Yeah.
You don't specifically ask for an accessible Xbox. You buy the Xbox and it's built in, ready to go out of the box, which we always used to say about Apple all the time. But, the fact that I've got, an Xbox here, one in here and one in the lounge room, it's just amazingly credible to think, maybe even just 10 years ago, none of this stuff existed.
Look, we've come a lot. You're right. We've come a long way, and we have to keep being vigilant. And, people like me will keep bleating on and beating the drum from time to time. But it's also important to, I do keep a gratitude journal. I think that's really important. And, when I think, for example, of all that we've got with audio described content on Netflix and iTunes now and an increasing number of other sources, and the fact that we can choose to consume that Netflix content either directly on the accessible TV, with an Apple TV, on Windows, on a tablet. I mean, there are so many ways that we can consume this content now. How far we've come just even in the last decade, it's staggering.
I mean, it is incredible. I mean, I've got so much choice here, mate. I mean, I do have a Windows 10 laptop in my house. Everything's really all Macs and everything else. But the amount of accessible things I've got in my house, particularly third-party products. I mean, my Ring Video front doorbell, my weather station, my meat thermometer I use when I do it for the barbecue, the barcode readers. It's just amazing what even not so much the operating system, but all the third-party products you can now get. Like I mentioned briefly a while ago, my coffee machine, the $3,500 one. I mean, who would have thought that a touchscreen device could be made accessible purely via running an app on your smart device?
Yes.
There better be some good coffee coming out of that machine.
It can make about 30 different types of coffee.
Oh, goodness. You should open up your own restaurant.
It does hot chocolate. It does, you can even actually use it for hot water if you really wanted to. Rather than using a kettle, I sometimes be a bit of a smart A and go, let me just put this machine on so I can pour you a bit of hot water, shall I?
Yeah. Well, we always, even back when I was doing main menu in the sort of 2000, we always knew that access to appliances was a very difficult nut to crack, and there were all sorts of ideas about that. But of course, what's happened now is that the smartphone, the tablet has become, and even the smart speaker has become the conduit to those devices, which is pretty exciting, really. So you've got the Ring doorbell. Is that the one you have?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah. That works where somebody rings the bell and it actually sends you a push notification, I think. Is that the one?
Correct. Yes. And you can either talk to the person on audio or video, or if you're on the other side of the world, because it's all via the internet, you can say, look, I'm really sorry. I'm really busy inside. I can't come to the door now. Just come back later. Or if you've got a parcel, leave it on the doorstep. My wife uses it all the time because sometimes when she comes home at night time, because it's also got a motion sensor, when the car goes past our front door into our garage, then I know I can, wander out the door, open up the door for her, and she can bring all the stuff inside. So it really does make life a lot easier for me.
Yes, we have a security system here that's about 7 or 8 years old, and I'm in the process of evaluating an upgrade now. We've got an intercom outside and all that sort of stuff, but it's time to upgrade. And I've been looking at some of these options. I mean, some of them even send you a push notification and tell you specifically what kind of thing is outside. Like there's a pet outside, there's a human outside, or there's a vehicle pulling up. And that's pretty impressive from a blind person's point of view.
Yeah. And even quickly, just some of the apps. I mean, Find My Friends is amazing. And I know you mentioned the Live, whatever it was called, the Live 365 or something. But I mean, with the Find My Friends app, when my son started school this year, he got on the wrong bus, and I was able to let him to get off the bus and say, wait where you are, and Mum and Dad will come and get you, because we could just drive to him on the map. Mm-hmm. And when I got there, well, weren't you worried that we weren't coming? He went, no, because I got Find My Friends out of my iPhone and I could see where you were.
Yes, it's wonderful. And some of the blindness-specific apps even. There's just so much good stuff going on. AI. And I know that you'll be continuing to be at the forefront of it. And seriously, I just want to say myself how much I appreciate all that you give to the blind community selflessly, because you've made one heck of a contribution. And I hope I will continue to hear you on the podcast and those sorts of things, because you do have a pretty low-key knack of explaining stuff to people. And that's a gift, to not only have the knowledge, but then to be able to impart that knowledge to somebody else.
Yeah, because I really found your Mac tutorial helpful, Jonathan. clued me into that one when I got my
when
my
Bonnie
Mac.
asked me too many questions about her Mac, I said, "Go listen to David Woodbridge,"
and it was really helpful.
Yeah. I am probably going to keep going. I mean, I know I whinged and whined early this year about stopping at 500, which I've got about 14 to go. But really, I'm having so much fun sharing information that I really don't think I'm going to stop.
No, you'd miss it. You'd miss it if you stopped. And we would miss it too, more importantly. Yeah. So keep up the great work. It's been a real pleasure to spend this time with you.
Go get a cup of coffee now.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to The Blind Side, a production of Mosen Consulting. On the web at mosen.org.